Former CIA covert operations officer and president of Diligence LLC, Mike Baker, joins me now by phone. Mike, it's a long period from inspiration to execution, and a period where people can't really track well. So what does law enforcement do when they're trying to trail someone like this who isn't on their radar?
Well, I mean, right now what they're doing is they're, reverse engineering it, which is obviously unsatisfactory because, it's a post-event investigation as opposed to something that could preempt or minimize or disrupt an attack. But what they're doing is several different layers to this. One of them is the forensics work that they do through reviewing his social media, through going through and looking at his computer or whatever devices that he had. Part of it's the human element. They're talking to family members. They're talking to friends. They're doing sort of the old school type of investigation where you sit down and you piece this together. And they're looking to see whether at any point in time he crossed paths with anybody else who may be of interest or who may have been on their radar screen, and that's unlikely because that's the nature of this beast. That's the problem that we're facing. The person or the individual or the way that we find out about these attacks primarily, if we're fortunate, is that a family member has to pick up that phone and call the local or the state or the federal authorities and say, you know what, I think we've got a problem with my son or my daughter or my cousin, whatever it may be. And getting to that point, getting that level of trust within the Muslim community is a very, very heavy lift.
Mike, is there any cases across this country where you feel that law enforcement is doing an incredible job of working with the Muslim community?
Well, I think they're doing a very impressive and off the radar screen effort to try to develop relations. I mean, they've known this for some time. This is not a new idea. This is not something that just come to them after this or San Bernardino almost a year ago, whatever it may be. They've been working on trying to figure out how do you get those relationships within the community. And frankly, it has worked in places. In some communities, Detroit would be an example. Minneapolis, to some degree, is an example where we have had successes, where cases of concern have been brought forth by family members to law enforcement, and that's a success. But they don't advertise those successes, and that's part of the problem. Is you're not in a position. It's much like intelligence operations. You're not in a position to bang the drum and say, look, see, we had a great success here, because for the most part, you got to keep these things off the radar screen.
So, Mike, one of the ways that they ended the press conference today, law enforcement said to be alert across the country that this happened twice in Columbus, Ohio. It could happen anywhere in America. What advice would you give to people across the country today?
Well, if you have a friend that you're concerned about because of the what they're exhibiting or their disturbing behavior, and it seems well off, or they seem, this is a long shot, obviously. Who's in contact with someone who's being radicalized? But if it happens, then act on your instinct. You see those gut instincts are correct. Do something about it. It's that old, trite saying, see something, say something, that, has become so familiar to people. And that's pretty much it. The other part of it is, just be aware of your surroundings. But you can't, and here's, again, part of the problem. You're not going to walk around in a high state of alert wherever you happen to be. Look at these students walking around OSU, around the campus, coming off the holiday weekend. You're not going to ask them to be on a high state of alert, worrying about an attack. That's not real life. So, when you're in public gatherings, when you're in large public gatherings, when you go into transportation hubs, the obvious ones, yes, fine, step it up a little bit. Be a little bit more aware of what's happening around you. And then, like I said, if you happen to be in contact with somebody who maybe is displaying worrisome behavior, it appears to become more radical in their views and their thoughts, well, then maybe the better part of valor is to say something. We're all a little bit hesitant to do that because nobody, they feel like you're dropping a dime on a friend or a relative, but it's the only way, really, at the end of the day. It's not vetting. Vetting wouldn't have stopped this attack. Advanced vetting, or whatever you want to call it, wouldn't stop the next one, perhaps. But developing the ability to get people to talk to law enforcement, to have that trust, to say there is some concern, that's the way we need to be going.
And when you talk about Anwar al-Awlaki, we've heard that he may have, FBI saying today that this attacker may have been inspired by Anwar al-Awlaki. What can you tell us about that? And what can you tell us about people who tend to draw inspiration? Is there a pattern with this?
Well, that's the problem. There's no set profile for these individuals. We'd like to think there would be, because that would be a very satisfying answer, but there's not. And so what you do is you kind of look at the large, steps that they go through, knowing that there's not a one standard, individual or behavioral pattern. With al-Awlaki, look, there's still a lot of his recruitment materials that exist. Probably will for a long time out there on the internet. They can be found. Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, Boko Haram, and others of the same mind have produced other recruitment videos. People are out there on that side of the fence, actively looking for people like this attacker at OSU. They're looking for, it doesn't matter to them, they're looking for lost souls who are looking for something to latch onto. They're looking for people who have vulnerabilities and that they can prey on those vulnerabilities and start to work that recruitment process. So they're looking for people like that, and or if they happen to latch onto someone who's a true believer and a real zealot, great. From their perspective, and that's why it's sort of it's more of a theoretical thought to say that ISIS inspired this OSU attack. Yes, they did in a sense, but there wasn't a direct connection. There was just this idea that this individual was out there, and for whatever reason, he latched onto this as the trigger. So, there's only so much that we can do without the benefit of the Muslim communities around the country working with law enforcement.
It's certainly a hard fight. Former CIA covert operations officer Mike Baker. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.